Hi, I'm Amie Clark, co-founder of theseniorlist.com. You probably know by now that long-term care is very expensive. What you probably don't know is who's going to pay for it, how, and when. Today I'm talking with Cory Smith, who's a financial advisor for Alegis Financial Planning in Portland, Oregon. Cory will share his knowledge and insights about the cost of long-term care and its advice for preparing in retirement and beyond. Thanks for joining me, Cory. I'm so excited to talk about the rising long-term care costs. Not that it's a good thing necessarily that we're talking about this, but I'm just super excited to have you back to share with our audience your knowledge about long-term care costs and how people are paying for them, and any tips and knowledge nuggets that we can get from you. So thanks again for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Happy to be here. Thanks, Amie.
So my first question is, I think people for the most part know that long-term care is expensive, but I remember when I worked with clients directly in senior housing, for most people, there was always this, the sticker shock when it came to discussing the actual costs of long-term care. I think a lot of people assume somebody else is going to pay for it or the government is going to cover it. So, just can you give us it's hard because I know this changes depending on where you live in the US, but how much exactly does long-term care cost?
Yeah, that's a great question, and you're right. It varies greatly by state and also by just rural versus urban communities. It can have a huge difference in cost. But if we look at healthcare costs, just healthcare costs in general, one statistic that I read recently that I found very interesting, in 2021, for a 65-year-old couple that's retiring, the cost of the projected projected healthcare cost for them is over $650,000. And that's just healthcare. That doesn't include any kind of long-term care costs that they might have. So you're right, sticker shock for a lot of people. But if we look at just long-term care costs, of course, there's a broad range of in-home care to nursing home care, assisted living care, all of those things in general. Right now, in-home care is running between $4,500 to $6,500 a month, depending on the area. And then if we look at a nursing home, of course, that's much, much more expensive. And you're looking at between $7,500 a month for a semi-private room to upwards of $9,000, $10,000 a month for a private room. So very, very expensive.
Yeah, I'm familiar with those numbers, but just hearing you say them it really is shocking. Your numbers about home care, do you happen to know if that is part-time, full-time?
So that's part-time. I actually, from recent experience with a client of mine, I've got a client here in our area that's receiving home health care 24 hours a day, and it's running her about $18,000 a month. So, but she wants to stay in her home, and so it's worth it.
Yeah, and certainly, grateful that she can afford, to do that. If those are her wishes to remain in her home, that's, what a blessing for her to be able to pay for that. But still, it's just an incredible amount of money. And I kind of already spoke to this, but many of the clients that I worked with in the past were just simply not aware of these costs. Is that your experience also with the clients that you work with? And you're working with, clients earlier on in the journey, before they actually get to this point, you know these people and you're intimately, familiar with their finances. Do you have the same experience where your clients just aren't prepared for these numbers once the time comes?
Absolutely, we are. An interesting thing that we're finding is that a lot of people that are dealing with these issues with their parents right now um, are becoming more and more prepared for themselves because they've now seen it, and they know what it costs, and they know what that entails. And so as this, as we see this big group of our population age, there's more and more people that are dealing with it on their parents' side, which in a way is good because it's kind of forcing them to prepare for themselves so that they're, better able to take care of it when the time comes for them.
For sure. Even grandchildren, I'm imagining there's adult grandchildren that are dealing with these issues, and realizing that, they need to start saving for their retirement, and, again, that these things aren't just paid for by somebody else.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, and do those long-term care costs, do you think, based on your experience and based on the data that you have, are these, staying flat year to year? Is there an increase that people should expect? I mean, we're talking about these costs now. What does that look like in 2 years? What kinds of increases or not can people expect in the future?
So that's a great question. Not only are these costs going up, but they're going up dramatically. If we look at the rate of inflation, they're much, much higher than the rate of inflation. And so as expensive as it is today, when we project down the road, 20 years, when a lot of our clients may need these services, the prices just become astronomical. It's when we run different scenarios, it's pretty common for us to be looking at, between $150,000 to $250,000 a year, 20, 25 years down the road. And we think that that's pretty realistic.
That's incredible. So let's dive into the nitty-gritty about paying for these costs. People who have been doing their research are probably familiar with, some of the programs that will pay for some or all of long-term care costs. But if you could take us through, what and your experience with paying for those costs, what and who pays for those costs, that'd be great.
Yeah, a lot of people at first just try to pay for it out of their own pocket, whether that be from income or assets or a combination of the two. The big risk that we see with that is that if the first spouse ends up needing care for an extended period of time, a lot of times the assets can get dwindled down and be gone. And when that first spouse passes away, it's very common that the surviving spouse is left with very small amount of assets to take care of themselves. And so that kind of becomes the default plan for a lot of people, where unfortunately that may not have good consequences for them. A lot of people erroneously think that Medicaid or Medicare will pick up the tab and pay for it. And the reality is that that is not the case. Medicare will pay for a very small portion of long-term care if you fit into certain criteria in how you got to that care. And Medicaid really only comes into play if you've spent down enough of your assets, or you don't have the assets in order to qualify for Medicaid. So Medicaid will pay for long-term care, but you basically have to be pretty much broke for them to step in. A lot of our clients that have served in the military have VA benefits, and VA does have a long-term care portion to it. But from our experience, it rarely will cover 100% of the cost. It'll cover a piece of the cost.
So just speaking from personal experience, my grandmother, she qualified for aid and attendance benefits through the VA. And that was, if I remember correctly, about $2,000. It might have been a little over $2,000 a month. So that covered about half of her monthly bill in assisted living. So, and then she had a little bit of Social Security, and the rest, thank goodness, she had saved her money for quite a while, and she was able to pay out of her own pocket. But yeah, the programs that you're speaking of, other than Medicaid, as you said, you have to be essentially destitute to qualify for Medicaid. Medicare is not going to pay for it. Medicare is only going to pay for a short time in a skilled nursing setting. That's the only level of care that Medicare is going to cover.
Right. So we encourage people to look at insurance so they can transfer that risk to an insurance company. And so if people qualify, we think that long-term care insurance can be a great way to pay for these needs down the road, and a great way for people to prepare so that if they end up needing the care, they've got an asset or a vehicle in place that will allow them to do that without having to spend down all the rest of their assets in order to do it.
Okay, so can you tell us a little bit more about long-term care insurance? I know most people may be familiar with it, but may not necessarily know much more than that, especially if they don't have long-term care insurance. What levels of care does it pay for? Does it pay for somebody who wants to stay in their home as long as possible? Give us kind of the high level view of long-term care insurance.
Okay, so traditional long-term care insurance is insurance that you pay a premium for the rest of your life, typically on a monthly or annual basis, and it will cover a certain period of time. And most of these policies will cover some in-home care, as well as assisted living, long-term care type facilities. And dependent on the policy, they'll cover it for either a certain period of time, up to many years, or even up to lifetime. The downside with a lot of these traditional long-term care policies is that the companies didn't realize that people were going to live as long as they are living. And because of that, a lot of these policies have been mispriced. And so we deal with clients all the time that have traditional long-term care insurance policies, and they get notices in the mail that their premiums are going up. And a lot of times they can go up 20, 30, 40%. And when you've paid for a policy for so many years, it kind of puts you in a position where you feel like you're stuck, because now you either continue to pay for it or it lapses, right? And so while these are really good policies, for a lot of our clients, they just don't fit because of the risk involved of having increased premiums down the road. So what we encourage clients to look at, along with traditional long-term care policies, are policies that are what we call asset-based long-term care policies. And that's basically where you take an asset that maybe you have earmarked for long-term care, and you move it over and you put it into a policy that is now set aside for long-term care. And the thing that we like about those policies are that they are completely guaranteed. So the premiums can't change. In fact, most of our clients, it's just a one-time, they move some money over and the policy is paid up. It's done for the rest of their life. They cover 100% benefit for in-home care, as they do for nursing home care. So you don't have to be in a facility for the benefit to kick in. And then the other thing that we like about those policies is that on most of those policies, they have a death benefit. So if you're the lucky one that lives to a ripe old age and you pass away in your sleep and you never needed long-term care, there's a tax-free death benefit that pays to your beneficiaries. So at least somebody in the family got a benefit from the policy, as opposed to traditional long-term care insurance where you could pay for it for the rest of your life. And once again, if you're the lucky one that never needs it, it bought you peace of mind over the years, which is a good thing, but that's all that it bought you.
And then it's gone.
And then it's gone.
Yeah. No. You spoke about, you're talking about home care, that it would pay for home care. Are there waiting periods? I know with a lot of long-term care insurance policies, there's a 60 to 90-day waiting period before the policies kick in. So is that the same with asset care? Asset care, is that the correct name?
Correct.
Okay.
So no. So the nice thing with asset care is that for home health care, there is no waiting period. So, and it's very easy to qualify for the benefit. Basically, if you can't perform 2 out of your 6 assisted daily livings, you qualify. Mm. And as I mentioned, there's no waiting period for home health care. There is a 60-day waiting period for in a facility care, but we have found that's okay because by and large, most of our clients want to stay in their homes as long as possible. And so to have a 0-day waiting or elimination period for in-home care is very nice.
Yeah, that's really great. I mean, it's a place for people to start, and most people start needing, some level of care in their homes anyways. So, to have that support early on instead of burning through all your cash just on home care up front, that's really great.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think this is a newer program, correct? This isn't something that's been around.
So actually, it's been around for over 20 years.
Oh, okay. Never mind.
So quite a while. But unlike traditional long-term care insurance that's been around for 40, 50 years, this is kind of a different way of taking care of those potential costs down the road.
I feel like asset care could use a whole video all on its own. So I think at another time, we'll definitely plan on that for our subscribers. I think that would be great. So my last question is, and this, we kind of talked about this in our last video, and I've talked with other experts about kind of the same question, but from your perspective, when is the best time for somebody to start preparing, planning, thinking about long-term care costs?
So that's a great question. And what we find is that most people tend to think about long-term care about the same time that they start thinking about retiring. And so a lot of our clients don't look at long-term care until they're in their mid-60s when they're retiring. And that's fine. And we can usually help them. But what we have found is that the earlier the better to start planning and preparing for these things, even if it's just preparing ourselves physically, right? We're gonna stay in better shape. We're gonna eat well. We're gonna do everything to try to keep our bodies as healthy as possible. That right there, I think, is a great way to prepare and hopefully prevent some of the long-term care needs, but also financially. Much easier to prepare for these costs in our 40s and 50s than it is in our 60s and 70s to try to take care of it. And if you're looking at the insurance route, insurance is based on your age and your health, and so typically that's never better than today. So we'd start talking to our clients about long-term care costs in their 40s, and usually between their 40s and 50s, try to get something in place. And for a lot of our clients, ideally, we would like to have this completely taken care of by the time they're retired, so that it's one less thing that they have to worry about paying for in retirement. They know that it's completely taken care of, and it kind of gives you permission to use your assets in retirement for all the other things that you want to do with retirement, because you know that you're not going to need those assets for long-term care because you've already got that covered.
That's a great idea. What would you have to say to a skeptic? And I think of a couple of people in my own family, even though we've had family members who have had, to use long-term care and who've been in the system for quite a while. What would you say to the skeptics who say, I'm healthy, I'm still quite young, I can't imagine something like, needing something like this ever in my life? Any words of wisdom?
Yeah, and we run into that all the time. And that's normal. None of us want to think of ourselves as needing that type of care. But the reality is that, about 70 to 75% of us will need some form of long-term care. And so the odds are that we're going to need some form of care. And so we just think that being prepared for that is a good thing. If we can prepare for it in a manner that if we need it, great, we're taken care of. But if we don't need it, we're still okay, even better. And that's where those certain types of policies can come into play, where, if you need it, you've got the benefit. If you don't need it, there's still a great benefit that goes to your beneficiaries. So we think that even for the skeptics, there's a way to prepare for it. And if you are as fortunate as you think you are, that you'll never need it, it still can end up being a good thing for your family.
So I'll sum that up by saying that the skeptics need to talk to somebody like you to get all the information and to make sure that they know all the things, and hear that number, 70 to 75% of people end up needing some form of long-term care. That's most people.
It is.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you again, Cory, for this awesome video about, long-term care costs and how to pay for them. We really appreciate it and can't wait to have you back for the next one.
Thanks, Amie. Appreciate it.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.